What's up, world, and welcome back to another edition of I Mix What I Like here on the Real News Network, where we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Rico Chapman and Shaheen Ariedien about the comparisons and connections between the Black consciousness movement in South Africa, or Azania, and the Black liberation struggles here in the United States, and where hip-hop falls into all of that. And if you've missed or want to catch up on what we were talking about in this segment, please go back to the Real News Network and check out our first segment. Dr. Rico Chapman and Shaheen Ariedien are co-authors of a new forthcoming, book chapter in a forthcoming book on hip-hop and activism. And they join us again for this segment of I Mix What I Like at the Real News Network. Welcome back, fellas.
Thanks.
So, Shaheen, I wanted to pick up with you and talk a little bit more about, or start a conversation about the rise of hip-hop in Azania, or South Africa. And something that I did not know until reading your chapter is that you say that hip-hop emerged out of the Cape Flats region of South Africa and out of the colored community. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, hip-hop in South Africa can loosely be traced to the early 80s, especially with the release of a song like, Rapper's Delight, and a lot of images of B-boys and B-girls and aerosol art that came from the United States. But the actual history and connection between the so-called colored community and Black America can be traced to like the 1800s and possibly before that. I'm sure Rico has more information on that. And so for a few reasons. A, the Cape Flats, to a large degree, is part of Cape Town, and Cape Town is a port city. And so a lot of the information that we got, because Cape Town is the port city, came through sometimes sailors. We'd exchange with sailors, cassette tapes or whatever. Sometimes it was exiled family and friends or pen pals abroad and so on. So that's one reason. Another reason is I think that the so-called colored community, outside of that historical connection, and because it's a port city, is also more open to external influences and to make that part of their cultural expression. The same can be said for parts of Brazil and other parts of the world as well. So those are some of the connections. In terms of its relevancy, I think that if you look at the conditions that gave birth to hip-hop in the South Bronx, it's pretty much super similar to the conditions that gave birth to hip-hop in South Africa. Forced removals, the police brutality, exploitation. You had basically Reagan's economic strategies and everything else that came with that. That's essentially apartheid as well, right?
And of course, the two supported one another, right?
Right,
so it's
exactly.
Another perfect connection, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are those kinds of connections. And I think one other strong connection is, well, that in both places, it was the descendants of a people who has experienced and endured trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. And so I think that hip-hop also provided this almost therapeutic outlook, for lack of a better term, outlet for young people on both sides, of the Atlantic, to be able to fashion identities, different kinds of identities out of this kind of alienation, where on the one side, someone could be Grandmaster Flash, as opposed to whatever the state said you should be called, or the kind of identities and expectations that comes from a mixture of white supremacist ideology, capitalism, and patriarchy. And then on the other side as well, in South Africa, my MC name back in the day was like Dominator of Sound all around. There are all kinds of whatever names. But and as trivial as it might seem, you are fashioning identities. You know what I mean? out of the fragments of what's left by this kind of macro level factors, and a yearning to tap into our humanity and our creativity.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Before we switch out, just real quick, I'm very interested in something you mentioned that I'm not that familiar with, but in my own, attempts to study the history of the mixtape itself, as hip hop's first real national mass medium. I'm interested to what extent those cassettes, as you mentioned, that made it down to the Cape Flats, had that impact. I mean, were these cassette tapes of actual artist recordings, or were these DJ mixtapes, or was it a combination of the two? I'm curious about that. I'm fast. A combination of the two. Yeah, that's a
combination of the two. I mean, some of it had were albums. Some of it was just mixtapes, as in a DJ that spun stuff. Some of it was actually from a club as well. So by the time there was a club called Teasers, and then the base in Cape Town, those were kind of these matinee clubs for hip hop heads. Hip hop wasn't the only music that was played, but we had our sets, and those cassettes circulated, and it circulated to the point where the quality was so bad with the hiss and everything, that people's ears got accustomed to that. So when they heard the actual version, it kind of sounded weird. It sounded too clean.
Right.
You know?
This is almost too good. I can't handle how good it sounds.
Yeah. Where's the griminess of it? So the mixtape played a very important role in disseminating the music and information. And the same happened later on, when I was involved with Bush Radio, a community radio station in Cape Town that essentially just broadcasted in a very specific region in Cape Town. But I find myself in Johannesburg or other parts of South Africa, and people in Cape Town would record the radio show and then send it to family and friends in other parts of South Africa. So I find myself walking around in Joburg and hearing a car drive by and hearing the radio show, from a few weeks ago, blasting through the speakers.
Wow. You also mentioned in your chapter that hip hop, much like everywhere else, wasn't always overtly, radically political, and was not often seen as the initial soundtrack to the revolution there in South Africa. And what I also noticed was a similarity was that there was the old guard black activist community that you all talk a little bit about in your chapter, that was a little hesitant to accept this new hip hop thing as part of their movement. And similarly, that was the case here, where the old style or old guard of black activism and certainly black radio was resistant to hip hop. I mean, it wasn't just white commercial radio that kept hip hop away. It was sort of this black bourgeoisie that was also saying, look, we don't want to be dragged back down into the depths of our community as we struggle so hard to middle class ourselves and civil right ourselves away in some cases from the rest of our community. So I was interested in that kind of similarity that you all talk about in your chapter. But Prophets of the City, Shaheen, was clearly a radical group, and I was also wondering if to what extent you all had, before I'm about to say, were compared to Wu-Tang in terms of the style and the size of your collective. Certainly, probably maybe more overtly political in your case than they were. But that was just something that I noticed as well. Either of you, I'd like a response, if you could, to any of those ideas. This resistance of the old guard, hip hop's emergence as a political, sound of the struggle, and then Rico, I do want to come in and talk more specifically about these comparisons between the Black consciousness movement and the Black liberation struggles here.
Maybe Rico can start with some of those comparisons.
Okay, sure.
In terms of the resistance, and then I'll add on.
Okay.
I guess let's talk about this old guard and the identity piece just a little bit. To give us some context. So, of course, we know that Black power influenced the nomenclature here in the United States, moving from Negro to Black.
Right.
And there was this ideological struggle between Kwame Ture, then Stokely Carmichael, and Martin Luther King Jr. And if you move that to South Africa, Black consciousness, led by the South African Students Organization and BICO, they changed the nomenclature, the language from non-white to Black. Mm-hmm. More, even so that the newspapers had to stop using non-white and start using Black to really be considered valid, right? So this whole identity piece was led by the students, but also the students managed to win the masses and win the older guard to their point, with struggle, of course, because if you look at the relationship between then Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King Jr., they had this ideological battle going on the Meredith March. And it was freedom now or Black power. And when they got to Greenville, Mississippi, and Kwame Ture shouted Black power, and the masses responded when he said, "What do you want? Black power. What do you want? Black power." And it just took hold, right? King had to take note of that, and in that whole discussion was Vietnam. And of course, when King started to speak out against Vietnam, he was assassinated shortly after. But I think that Kwame Ture managed to win, not as if it was a competition, but gain some sympathy from Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers. Not that there was a real divide there, because I know media can give us this cut and dry divide when it wasn't that cut and dry. There were some commonalities of this whole theme of freedom now and Black power. But when it came down to affecting the language, which then affect the ideology and identity of a people, I think you can give that credit to the Black Power movement and the Black consciousness movement, because they managed to change the identity, the thought process of the masses from, no, now you're not a Negro, you're Black, you're not non-white, you're Black, so that's moving us forward in terms of identity. And those who we consider the old guard, they had to acknowledge that.
Shaheen, you wanted to get in on that question as well. Right. Please do.
Okay, so similar to what Rico just described now in terms of youthful voices being met with resistance and then later on becoming the norm, I think the same can be said about South Africa, especially with hip-hop. At first, we were met with resistance. I can't really speak on the Black bourgeoisie because we didn't move in those circles, and we certainly didn't give a damn what they thought about us. But elders inside the liberation movement, they weren't really feeling hip-hop at the time because they felt it was a tool of cultural imperialism. And if you look at the history of the Cold War, that particular moment, and the kind of aggressive tone and character of U.S. Imperialism, in some ways you can kind of understand why there was this kind of resistance. And I think coupled with that, when young people come out with particular kinds of art forms and particular kinds of expression, that's just part of the history. That's how things go down sometimes, And in terms of Prophets of the City, I think we were probably more seen as a kind of a public enemy of South Africa as opposed to Wu-Tang Clan. And there were times when we embraced it and times we resisted it because we didn't want to be boxed in. So you can find lyrics by Prophet of the City that's like really out there and silly. And that was a conscious effort to not be boxed into any particular, kind of pigeonhole and so on.
No, that was just my aesthetic comparison to the Wu-Tang Clan, the numbers and the style and all of that. But I hear your point's very well taken. Well, Shaheen Ariedien and Dr. Rico Chapman, thank you for joining us again on this segment of iMixWhatILike at the Real News Network.
Sorry, can I correct myself real quick?
Okay.
When I said we moved from Negro to Black, actually we were using the term colored. I'm sorry.
Right.
We went from colored to black.
and I believe as Kweli or Pharaoh said, and we've gone right back to colored and Negro and nigger. So, you know, it's just, well, Dr. Rico Chapman and Shaheen Ariedien, thank you very much for joining us again on this segment of I Mix What I Like here at the Real News Network.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us at the Real News Network, where we will again see you before too long. Take care, everybody. Peace. I mix what I like.